Okay, Bob, how much stock do you put into the series win over the Mets?
I put a lot. That's on the road, which is already tough to win, whether the team's good or bad. And you did it against one of the hottest teams in the National League, against the trifecta of doom with those pitchers out there, with Scherzer. And I mean, to have that team rolling the way they were, talking about the Mets, and the three pitchers you were facing, the worst of which, Carrasco had an ERA of 3.19 coming into the game. So they were rolling. Their on-base percent, they were leading all the categories offensively and pitching and everything. And you went out there and took 2 of 3, and you could make an argument they should have swept them, if not for kicking themselves, stepping all over themselves with errors and base running gaffes in the second game. So I put a lot of stock into it. It doesn't mean I think they're going to do that every time they're going to win every series, but to get up off the mat the way they did after a terrible run and take it 2 of 3 from the Mets at Citi Field, that's a big deal.
Take us through the personal, emotional roller coaster you had watching Diego Castillo save on Sunday.
I'm just now recovering. I was having heart palpitations. I had the doctor on the line. I listen, I don't have a ton of confidence in the guy. He hasn't really given me a reason to have a ton of confidence in him. And when they brought him in, there might have been a few expletives thrown around, and I was racking my brain. Is there not a better option in the bullpen? Is there somebody whose arm is still attached to their body that can take his place? But listen, he went out there and got the job done in an extremely tough circumstance. And credit to him, because he has not been good. And he could easily go out there and mentally fall apart and mentally just try to be too fine and aiming the ball. And he went out there and just let it rip and got the job done. So I give him the tip of the cap, if you will. Do I think he's going to be that guy every time he steps out there? No, I don't. I hope to be wrong on that. But yeah, there was a lot of tension. I think after it was over, I unlocked my hands and felt like, ow, it kind of hurt, because I was just gripping, just clenching my fist through that whole thing. But he got it done. So kudos to him.
What about the Mariners would you give the highest and lowest grades to this year?
Oh, highest grades. There's individuals. Are you talking about as a team? Because there's obviously individual. I mean, listen, Ty France to me, and take this in the right context. I'm not saying he's gonna be Edgar Martinez. He's got a chance to be a version of Edgar where you just expect that he's going to hit, and he uses the whole field. He's not pull happy. He's not power happy. He'll go with the outside pitch and take it to the opposite field, and you just expect him to get a hit. It's just he is such a consistent player, just in terms of what he produces. His approach doesn't change. He doesn't get rattled. I don't ever expect him to go into a slump. So I'm extremely pleased watching him, and J.P. Crawford as well, obviously. I guess defensively, I'm a little bummed about what we've seen. I think I don't know if it's careless or maybe they're just not as good defensively as we thought they would be. But I mean, 3 errors in that game 2 against the Mets. J.P. Crawford's already got like 6 errors on the season, and he's a brilliant player. He made some brilliant plays in this series, but I think I'm a little disappointed just in the collective defense. It started out really well, and it cost them in this series, and hopefully that's something that gets cleaned up. And then the bullpen, I think we came in knowing, listen, they're not going to be able to duplicate what they did last year. They were on a completely different plane last year. I mean, what they did was amazing, especially with the offense and the taped together rotation. So I didn't expect they'd be that. I think we've seen the regression, with guys like Steckenrider and people like that. So it's a disappointing, but that was a little bit more expected than the defensive woes they've had.
Rickey Henderson.
Well, anybody who's listened to the show knows I get a little cringy when people refer to themselves in the third person, and Rickey was a big fan of doing that. But he was sort of ageless. I mean, I remember thinking how cool it was as a Mariner fan to have somebody who was that accomplished and who was already a legend at that point by the time he was on the Mariners. And he was a shell of what he was in his prime when he was with the Mariners, but he was still a productive guy at times, could do things, and he was entertaining. But yeah, it was cool to say he was on the team, and it was kind of fun to watch him. Would have been cooler to see him closer to his prime, but I always marveled at his conditioning. The guy looked like he lived in the weight room and was in prime condition till the day he retired.
Okay, what do you want to see out of the Mariners in Toronto and Boston this week?
Boy, I'd like to see the offense continue with what we saw. I think, that was the hardest part as a Mariner fan is watching good performances from your starters, whether they were great or just good enough to keep you in the game, go by the wayside because they couldn't push across runs. They were getting guys on base. They had runners in scoring position, so it wasn't like nothing was happening. They had opportunities they just didn't capitalize on. And we saw them turn that around against the Mets. So I want to see a continuation of that because I think this offense is decidedly better than what we've seen through that rough stretch. I mean, you got guys that just haven't lived up to the back of the baseball card, so to speak. So it's good to see Winker starting to find it. Hopefully Toro and Torrens and Frazier can continue to take the steps forward, and Julio has been great along with France and Crawford. So I just want to see the offense continue with what we saw in New York.